A brief remark on divine law, religious custom, and secular law. Welcome, Vanakkam, Suprapadam. The three concepts that I propose to deal with very briefly have a direct bearing on our life, our religious outlook, our perception of ourselves as human beings, the extent and scope of our freedom, and our sense of reality, and so many other ways besides. So, anyone who is interested in himself or herself, particularly in respect of personal freedom, religious wholeness and sanity, as well as civic dignity in secular life, that is, would be interested in this attempt to attain some clarity about these important and inevitable concepts. When I was the principal of St. Stephen's College, I offered an add-on course to my students, and that course was titled Concepts and Patterns. Concepts and Patterns. I did not administer the course myself. I entrusted that duty to a colleague of mine, a very distinguished colleague. Her name is Dr. Karen Gabriel. She is a member, a senior most member now of the English department, and she is also the vice principal of St. Stephen's College. Now, I introduced that add-on course which had no credits for the final assessment of students. It was an add-on course which a student was free to do or not to do. The reason why I thought such a course should be offered to the students of the college was my concern that given the nature of the schooling through which students reach higher education, their weakest aspect of their educational formation is their incapacity to deal with concepts. And if you pause for a moment and examine yourself, you will see how alarmingly unclear you are. As I realized about 40 years ago, how alarmingly unclear I was at that time regarding the most basic concepts, even concepts that were directly relevant to the academic field which I was handling as a teacher, English literature. So, vagueness is something that we must become very clearly aware of. That may sound an oxymoron, but it is true. We are very vague about all concepts. And vagueness doesn't help us. Vagueness keeps us cowards. So courage and clarity are two sides of the same coin. Therefore, in order to illustrate this problem as well as to help us cultivate a small degree of clarity concerning three important concepts, which, as I said, have a direct bearing on the quality of persons that we are and can become, is the scope of the present video. And I do hope that you will take a sustained interest in this video and see it all the way to the end, and not use the apology of being too busy to participate in the development of a thought to its logical conclusion, which always takes time. Impatience and personal growth can never mix. Impatience shuts the door to our own growth and development. Impatience keeps us in a state of intellectual as well as spiritual bankruptcy. We must find the required time to understand issues of fundamental importance, and not only understand but understand it in great clarity, optimum clarity. All right, now let's come back to these three concepts: divine law, custom, and man-made law or secular law. How do we understand these things? Now, I'm looking at this not from the perspective of a jurist or a political philosopher or even a student of culture studies. I'm looking at it from the perspective of a believer, or if you like, someone who is interested in understanding religion as a human phenomenon, not as a divine phenomenon. Now, divine law by definition, or divine laws, are laws presumably originating from God. And therefore, in all religious traditions, divine laws exist. Laws or dictums or prescriptions, etc., they exist. And it is necessary to believe, or believers are obliged to believe, that God Himself is a source of these laws, and that these laws were revealed to human beings who comprise a particular religious bloc at a certain period in their evolution as a people, and that the reception of these laws played a significant role in their further formation as a religious community. Two phases of growth: first, their growth in the secular sense, in a non-religious sense at least, because the word secularism did not exist at that time. It's a word of comparatively recent origin. It's a fledgling word, to tell you the truth. Though we think that it's a word of great established reputation and settled meaning. So there was no religious tradition at that time, and the reception of divine laws inaugurates the beginning of, the genesis of, and the further development of a religious community. When I say that there was no religious tradition at that time, I did not mean to say, or I do not mean to say, that no religions existed at that time. There were many religions, but I'm talking about the evolution of a particular religion. For example, let's take the evolution of Christianity. Christianity did not exist at the time of Jesus. Christianity is formed consequent to the life and work of Jesus Christ. Other religions existed. For example, Judaism formed the immediate religious background to the formation of Christianity. But Christianity per se did not exist. That's the distinction I want to make. So when a religion is formed and at a very critical stage and its early stage, a set of laws, presumably dictated by God or given as such by God. If you remember the film 10 Commandments, you will remember the scene in which Moses goes up the mountain, and there God gives him these commandments inscribed on 2 tablets, and the inscription takes place in the form of a tongue of fire coming and hitting, tug, 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 chum, 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 on these stone tablets, and 10 commandments are formed, and Moses simply is a bearer of those commandments. He is not the creator or author of these commandments, he is the bearer of these commandments. So that's how religious command. Now the thing is this: once a religious commandment of divine origin is received, it is absolute and final. It cannot be modified. And because man is not the origin or source of these commandments, man has no business, no right, no authority to make the slightest change in them. So what has happened in the past really is that people who had some special experience, who formulated these rules, these guidelines for life, in order to give them a touch of absoluteness and in order to insulate them against encroachments by individuals in later times, created this wall of divinity around them and made people believe that these laws were actually dictated or actually written by God Himself. So it becomes an insurance against future tampering. If anyone wants to believe that God directly in the form of fire came and inscribed these commandments, I have no problem with it. The fact is that there is a touch of ultimacy about these laws, and I believe that these laws pertain to the very foundational experience of man. Therefore, they are not to be taken lightly at all. I personally attach a great deal of significance to 10 commandments, just as I attach a great deal of significance to the core instructions and commandments that comprise the spiritual tradition of all other peoples, the non-Christian communities. I have great respect for all of them, though some of my fellow Christians would be upset that I indeed am in that kind of an outlook. So, the one thing that we need to remember about divine laws, or laws that are labeled as divine, is that they are given once and for all, and that they cannot be and should not be modified. However, when it comes to Christianity, you find Jesus modifying the laws that Moses apparently received from God. But Jesus does not explicitly renounce those laws. He only says, I reduce all of them to one commandment. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Jesus' point is simple. Those 10 commandments which is given to the Jews through the agency of Moses, they have not become altogether redundant. The fact is that their essence is not recognized, and that's what you need to do. If you hold on to certain commandments, or if you subject yourself to commandments without knowing their essence, then you become a slave to the commandments, and the adherence to these commandments will even become harmful to human freedom. Whereas if you cooperate with commandments, knowing their meaning and their intention clearly, then these commandments can aid and strengthen you in the adventure of life. So Jesus' effort here in giving a new commandment is not to delete the old 10 commandments, but to identify the essence of these commandments, because without knowing, understanding and accepting the essence, it's impossible to practice the commandments as free agents of moral and spiritual action, which is what constitutes human stature. So according to Jesus, the essence of the 10 commandments is love. And therefore, if people can commit themselves to accepting love as the guiding principle of their life, then all the commandments are ipso facto, that is, by that very fact, fulfilled. On the other hand, if all the 10 commandments are there, acknowledged as applicable to them, but there is no love in the heart of people, none of these commandments will actually be complied with in their spirit and substance. Literally maybe, but not in their spirit. So this is the point that Jesus is making. At any rate, coming back to the idea of the divine law is presumably originating from a source other than human, and therefore is immune to human manipulations for all the ages to come. Now the second category, which is custom. Now we know that when a community is formed mainly on the strength of divine laws or revealed laws, as that community continues through history, on account of coming into contact with or coming face to face with various facets of life, certain guidelines are evolved. Because obviously the 10 commandments given are not comprehensive enough to address a whole range of specific life situations. By the way, if there are lawyers listening to me, they would be interested when I say that the function of the parliament is to enunciate laws, which everybody knows, but laws are general principles. No law is really meant to address a specific situation. The function of law is to provide the general principle in relation to it or in light of which specific individual instances are to be adjudicated. And the duty to do so, the adjudicatory duty, is delegated to the Justice Department, the justice delivery system, the apex of which is the judiciary. So, the laws passed by the Parliament are then handed over to the judiciary, and the judiciary adjudicates these laws or adjudicates emerging human situations in their specificity in light of the laws which are general principles enunciated by the Parliament. Now, why I have given this illustration is it can shed some light on the theme that we are developing. So, divine laws are all general principles of eternal application. Their relevance will never end. They cannot be jettisoned in the course of our journey through time and space. But they do not take into account, or they are not specific enough to address all individual instances that come to light as human life progresses through history. Newer and newer instances come up, newer and newer challenges come up. So, what the community does is, the responsible people, the wise men of the community do is, from time to time, they actually discharge a function of the modern judiciary. They evolve guidelines. Just as the judiciary has the right to supplement Parliament made laws, not all judiciary, the Supreme Court. The judgments, the pronouncements of the Supreme Court are what in technical language is called law declared, as against law legislated, law declared. So, the pronouncements of the Supreme Court also have the status of law. Similar is the relationship between divine law and custom. These customs are formed in the light of the divine law, but they seem to vary from each other, and they do vary from each other simply because they address different and evolving circumstances of life and the challenges arising therefrom. But to the extent that they are pronounced within the framework of the divine law, they do have great deal of sanctity and inviolability, and therefore members of a religious community are obliged to deem them to be inevitably applicable to their life. And therefore customs come to have a great deal of authority. And a religious community feels for generations thereafter obliged to abide by the customs that were evolved in the course of the development of this religious community. So, that is the relationship between divine law and customs. Now, there is a problem with customs that must be clearly understood. And what is that problem? In order to understand that problem aright, let me define custom in a very simple and clear manner. Custom is the sum total of the wise experiences of the past. Or custom is, or every custom pertains to a guideline evolved in light of the best experience of the past. And therefore, all customs relate to the past. There is no custom that applicable to us evolved today. Customs always relate to the past. And therefore, a people who submit themselves abjectly to customs without critically thinking about them subject themselves to the dictatorship or despotism of the dead. The despotism of the dead. I repeat, a people who subject themselves abjectly without the application of mind in a free manner in relation to the new realities that they are handling, they are living by, they submit themselves to the despotism of the dead. Because the guidelines that they evolved in the distant past, dim distant past, were very relevant, very valuable in the specific context in which they were maybe 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago. But much water has flowed under the bridge. They evolved those conditions which became customs in response to the emerging situation of their day. So, in their time, it was contemporary and it was very, very critically relevant. But we have come a long way. We have a distance of 1,000 years or 1,500 years between them and us. But the same thing continues without the slightest of change. That's the tyranny of custom that I'm talking about. And I'm saying that tyranny of custom is nothing but the despotism of the dead. In saying so, I do not want to rule out the possibility that some of the customs evolved in the past may still be relevant, but some of them may not. And therefore, we must effect a qualitative distinction between divine laws and customs. I say this with some degree of emphasis because what has happened in Christianity, particularly with the ascendancy of parochialism and denominationalism, is that customs have become even more binding, even more ultimate, even more clamorous than divine laws. And this aggravates people's religious bondage, slavery to religion. It's a very, very regrettable state. And many of the problems that we see between churches today can be understood in light of this. Customs serve on the whole a divisive role within the Christian community, and this problem is not confined to Christian community. It's found in all religious communities because all religious communities have traveled through history and they have gone through the same pattern and historical process that I am trying to very briefly sketch. Now let's come to the secular law. So we have dealt with divine law, we have dealt with custom, but then there is a third element which is secular law. Now, secular law is formulated clearly by man, and in a democratic context, that function is assigned to the parliament. The parliament legislates, and the judiciary then interprets and applies. So, that's how the justice delivery system works. Now, these laws are in a state of continuous flux. Even the Constitution of India, which may be likened to God-given rules in religion, God-given laws in religion, even the Constitution, the framers of the Constitution realized that they were formulating these very precious guidelines for national life and nation building from within their own context. But history doesn't stay frozen, and therefore, as the river of life continues to run, newer and newer situations will arise, and therefore to future generations the freedom must be granted to amend the Constitution to keep it in tune with the flow of life, which is a healthy concern, a wise concern. Therefore, in the formulation of the best of man-made laws, there is a recognition that these laws are formed within the flux of time and that they emerge in response to the changing stream of life, which brings up newer and newer, perhaps unprecedented situations which cannot be dealt with according to the laws formulated prior to their emergence, and therefore newer laws are required to handle the emergent and new situation. That's the reason why laws change and laws are continually amended. Now, in the Indian context, the entire penal code system has been revised, and a new Samhita, a new system of rules has come into effect from 1st of July. So, it's a recent experience. So, it's very fresh in your minds, and therefore, you can easily connect to it. So, divine law can never change and presumably must never change, though Jesus changed it, but changed it in a particular manner that I have already described, and I will not repeat my words. Custom is man-made, purely man-made, but unfortunately because it happens in the context of religion, it is treated sometimes even of higher consequence than divine law, which has a deleterious, harmful, regrettable effect on religious communities. Man-made law is from the very beginning, theoretically as well as in practice, recognized as a phenomenon always open to change, necessarily must change in tune with the emerging situations, and therefore you find laws being updated, amended, newer laws made, etc. It's a fluid and dynamic phenomenon, and that process will continue. So I thought this much clarity would help us to think more clearly on contemporary situations, and particularly when various advocacies are made in the name of religion as well as politics, so that we can at least have the peace of mind of having been clear about what is being bandied back and forth by people who do not really understand the issues that they are sponsoring. But even though we have nothing to do, formative to do with these things, at least we can have the luxury of clarity in responding to them. That's the only limited purpose of this video, and I hope that you found it useful up to a point. That's all that I can aim at doing, but I was certainly convinced, I'm convinced still, that it's worth sharing some of these clarifications with all of us, so that we can remain clear and convinced about the stand that we take, and therefore this will enable us to be non-partisan in the interest of truth. My dear friends, the one guiding principle for our life must be truth. Truth, truth, unwavering and heroic commitment to truth. But you cannot be committed to truth if you are not clear in your thinking. Clarity and commitment of truth must always coexist. They cannot but coexist. Therefore, an important goal in participating in this shared journey under the auspices of a temple of thought is to attain clarity, clarity, clarity in an age of confusion. As Matthew Arnold wrote in his poem, The Dover Beach, I think it's the article, Dover Beach is the title. It says, here we are as on a darkling plain where ignorant armies clash by night. Utter lack of clarity, total confusion. The alternative to clarity is confusion. No? So how does Matthew Arnold imagine contemporary existence? It's like two armies fighting. Where are they fighting? On a darkling plain. Darkling plain means a plain or an area on which darkness is intensifying its control, becoming darker and darker. Here we are as on a darkling plain where ignorant armies clash by night. They don't know what they are fighting for. They don't know why they are fighting, but they are fighting. That's how modern life is. That's very true. It's good to remember these words, no? Here we are as on a darkling plain where ignorant armies clash by night. Let it not be so with us. Let it not be so with us. Let it not be so with us. Jai Hind.